Okay, good evening, everyone. Could you see my slide?เห็นไอ้นี่ไหมคะเห็นสไลด์อาจารย์ขึ้นไหมคะ
เห็นครับ
อ๋อเสียงเบามากเลย Okay, let's start the contents of today. Just a second. Okay. The contents that I will going to talk about today, I will talk about the greenhouse gas emission that released from like a solid waste management activity. In every process of waste management, they can produce a lot of greenhouse gas depend on the activity. As I said, the solid waste is like one source of the greenhouse gas, and it's very important nowadays because we try to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas, and also we can call it like a reduce like a zero carbon or like a neutral carbon, something like that. That's why today I'm going to talk about like this topic. It's very important nowadays because the greenhouse gas from solid waste management start from like the waste generation. If we don't have any method to collect or disposal in like a appropriate disposal, maybe it can produce a lot of like the greenhouse gas, and the greenhouse gas as we know it can contribute to like a global warming and climate change, right? Especially methane. Methane is like they have like a global warming potential about 21 times when compared to like the carbon dioxide. It's quite high, right? It's like a major greenhouse gas that are related to like a waste sector, especially in landfilling and open dumping. You can see this figure about like the flow charts about the waste management. I already talked about like all flow charts, right? And today I just focus on like which step it can produce a lot of the greenhouse gas, right? For example, like the waste generation, various sources of the waste generation, like the composition of the solid waste is very important because if we produce some kind of like they contain like high carbon, right? Like high organic carbon or degradable of the carbon. It can cause of like the methane and carbon dioxide release into the environment, and also during the waste collection and transportation, we consume a lot of energies, right? Like fuels, and sometimes we use like a diesel, but sometimes we use like a natural gas, right? This process is also contribute to like a greenhouse gas emission during transportation and collection process. And after that, if we separate and make some recycling process, some part of the solid waste, maybe 20% or 30% is can recycling, right? If we separate and transfer to recycling process, maybe we can reduce the amount of the greenhouse gas emissions, right? And also, one thing is very important about this method is like a disposal method, right? For the disposal of solid waste, if we choose like a landfilling method and aerobic digestion, like a biogas production, composting, and MBT or mechanical biological treatment, like some process prepare for like the other process, like raw material for the other process, like the waste processing for composting, for make the energy recovery, something like that. We can call like a MBT. This process is also it can produce a lot of the greenhouse gas, right? Especially in landfilling, it produce a lot of methane. But if we use like the disposal method in incineration and open burning, it's like a burning waste, right? It's also if we control during we control the incineration process, we can control like the greenhouse gas emission, right? But during the operation and during the burning process, we also use a lot of the energies. it can cause of the methane release into the environment also. And otherwise, for the open burning, we know the open burning, we don't have like a control equipment or like to protect the environment, right? It's like we burning and release directly of greenhouse gas into the environment. Okay, look at in each process, which what process is can appropriate for like a solid waste management. In each process, they have some like advantage and disadvantage, right? Depend on the characteristic of waste that I also emphasize about the like the characteristics, right? Because if we know the characteristic of the solid waste, we can design for like a management system, like the disposal method also. And for the estimation of the greenhouse gas emission from like the municipal solid waste, uh, for the calculation about greenhouse gas emission, this is the same equations with the like a carbon footprint, something like that. We can calculate based on like the carbon dioxide emission. Normally we know for like a waste management produce a lot of like a methane, right? But we have to multiply by emission factor that's convert to the equivalent to like a carbon dioxide, right? Uh, Maybe you produce like a methane, nitrous oxide, but finally we calculate based on carbon dioxide emissions, right? The carbon dioxide emission equal to the activity data multiplied by emission factor. What's the important thing about the activity data? The activity data is we have to collect in each data about in each process or each step of the waste management, right? The start from like the waste generation. For the waste generation, which data we have to know about like the volume, the waste volume, like and also the generation rate, like a 1 kilogram per person per day, something like that. We have to know about the information to input in the for the calculation. And also the composition is very important. The composition we can estimate about the greenhouse gas emission in different kind of the waste, right? For example, food waste and plastic waste or like the metal waste, something like that. In each kind of the solid waste, they can contribute in different factor of the emission, right? And also the management practice is very important also for the collection, recycling, or material recovery. We can, this is like the one process, like for example like a recycling process, we can reduce the amount of like the greenhouse gas emission, right? Normally we can produce like a if we calculate 100% of greenhouse gas emission, maybe if we add recycling process for the waste management, we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emission maybe 5%, 10%, depend on our method, right? And also the biological treatment, incineration process, open burning or landfilling operation. We have to know about this data to calculate the carbon dioxide emission or like a greenhouse gas emission. Normally in terms of like the recycling process of the waste management, that's we define like a recovery of the material. The typically we are separate for the recycling material like paper, glass, metal, and plastic waste, something like that. And also why we are and in activity different activity data, we have to multiply in like the special about the specific about the emission factors, right? For example, if you decide for landfill, you have to multiply by like uh, one emission factor. But if you decide for incineration, maybe we have to multiply by 2 by t about the factors, right? Depend on that activity. We can find the information about the emission factor from like IPCC. It's like international governmental the climate change, right? They have some guideline about like the greenhouse gas emission inventory. Is like for the volume file that's designed for like a waste process, right? Like a waste management process. you can, if you need more information, you can go to this website to find like the guideline about the how to calculation about the greenhouse gas emission for the solid waste management like this. Like an international intergovernmental panel on climate change, right? If you go to this website and you choose like the volume file about waste, right? They have some guideline for calculation and also they have some like the Microsoft like Excel like sheet for like calculation, right? They have some like the information about emission factor already, but the emission factor depend on that area and also depend on like a country. In every country, they have to collect their information and make some average and decide for like individual for all like all emission factor is important, right? If you use like the general guideline for the IPCC, like the one number of the IPCC about emission factor, maybe they collect from various countries, right? Maybe it's quite different from like your own country. It is very important that you have to collect the information in your own country and then make some like an emission factor. And also they have some like many guidelines about the different method of the disposals, like the biological treatment, like landfilling, and also for like biogas production, something like that, and incineration and open burning of the waste. For this issue, like the waste generation and treatment data depend on like regional defaults. You can see in Asia and Africa, Europe, they have some like the different informations, right? I will show you about like Southeast Asia, like Thailand, right? We stay in like Southeast Asia, right? You can see the second column, and it talks about like the waste generation rate, right? Ton per capita per year. That means like the number of waste generation per person per day. They have some information about Southeast Asia, 0.27, right? Per tons per capita per year. But if you have your own information about your country, like Thailand, right? We can go, this is just the examples, right? By the country. You can see in Thailand, right? Municipal solid waste generation rate based on like the IPCC. They have some information about, no, we don't have information specific in Thailand in IPCC. But we have like old information like a 0.4. You can see if you don't have your information about your country and you use like the general data, right, from the IPCC, like a Southeast Asia. Maybe we can use like the rate about like a 0.27. But for our country, it's in the real situation, we produce like a high rate, right? Higher than like the IPCC information. That's why IPCC, they try to collect information in various countries around the world to make some like the emission factor data for the greenhouse gas emission calculation. And also, after you know about like the waste generation, volume, the composition of waste, you have to know about like sometimes if you have some recycling process, you have to know about the data of waste for like a waste stream analysis. For example, if you know about the information about the paper waste generation, about like the total, like this is just the assumed numbers, right? The assumptions, right? And this is information about the moisture content and like a degradable organic carbon. Why DOC or like a degradable organic carbon is very important factor because we can know about the content of carbon after degradation, and it can degradation in like a landfill or like a for the biological treatment. It can produce like a methane or carbon dioxide, something like that. This is can estimate about like the the amount of greenhouse gas, right? And also, sometimes after you collect the waste, the paper waste, not only transfer for like a composting installation or like a disposal like landfills, right? But sometimes you have some resource recovery. For example, if you produce like a one like a like 1,000 tons, right? And you can recover about like a 50%, like a 500 tons. That means remaining like a 500 tons, right? Transfer to stream A, stream B, and stream C, right? And after that, the byproduct in each stream, it can return to like reduce the amount of the greenhouse gas emission, like a substitutions, right? Like a composting. During produce the composting, it can produce like the greenhouse gas, right? But the byproduct, the products of the compost, we can apply for like a use on land of like a for fertilizer, something like that. Maybe we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas by this process, right? But the remaining process, like a stream B and stream C, maybe we have to transfer for like a final disposal process, like a landfilling. You can see the amount of waste is reduced, right? From the like a 1,000 tons of the paper waste, remaining 270 tons that's transferred to the final process. If we know this waste stream, we can calculate like more details about the greenhouse gas emission from landfill. And also the waste composition that I said is very important because we can identify choose some like a proper process, appropriate for process to manage the solid waste. It can separate in like 11 types, like a food waste, garden waste, paper, wood, textile, on a piece, and the rubber, plastic, metal, gas, and others. From the waste composition, you can see like a green color, the represent in green color. That means it's easy to degradable. It's like they contain like a degradable organic carbon. This is easy to degradable and produce like during the degradable process, it can produce like the methane and carbon dioxide or like a lot of the greenhouse gas. Right? And also this table show like the waste composition in like the various countries, like the based on like a regional defaults. You can see the Southeast Asia, the food waste contain a lot of the food waste, right? Nearly 50%, right? And after that, following by like a paper and cardboard, about 12 or 13 uh, percent, and other 16%, something like this. This is we have to know about the composition of uh, the waste generation. This is show the information about the regions, right? Like a Southeast Asia. But if we have like only in Thailand, is we can calculate like the real number and accuracy about the information about the greenhouse gas emission. And also this is show like a degradable organic carbon, total carbon. Why I have to show this table? Because in each type of the solid waste, you can see food waste, plastic or metal or glass, they contain in different uh, number of or different percent of the DOC's contents, right? This is we can use this number for calculation about the greenhouse gas emission. The first I will start from like after waste generation during next process. This is like the transportations, right? For the transportation is used in many states, right? Like a waste collection and then transport and then transfer for like a recycling site and transfer to like a disposal site, something like that. In each process may be related to waste transportation. How we calculate about the emission from transportation. normally we calculate based on like we use the fuels, right? The units of the fuels, like the total amount of the fossil fuel consumption. We collect information per month, right? In each month, depend on we use different type of the fuel, like a diesel or like a natural gas. If you use like the natural gas, maybe the emission factor for the carbon dioxide emission approximately 0.056 kilogram carbon dioxide per megajoule is lower than used like the diesels, right? The diesel approximately emission factor is higher than natural gas, about 0.074 kilogram carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide per megajoules, right? You can see the fuels of the fuel units divided by waste ton and multiply by energy that we use and depend on what kind of the fuels that we use, right? And multiply by emission factor. This is very important about emission factor. Depend on the fuel types, right? We can calculate the emission for transportation. And during after the transportation for the next process, if we choose to dispose by landfilling, we can calculate the major gas from the landfilling is methane, right? That's why we calculate based on the methane, because the methane produces 60% in landfill, like a landfill gas, and 40% of the carbon dioxide emission. As I said, the carbon dioxide emission is like we calculate like equal to like the the unit that we calculate about the greenhouse gas equal to like a carbon dioxide equivalent, right? That's why we don't calculate about the carbon dioxide. We calculate only the methane, because carbon dioxide emission equal to like a multiplied by 1 for global warming potential, but for the methane, multiplied by 21 for the global warming potential. And the emission factor, the emission about methane equal to the summation of the methane generated in every process, right? In like the waste category, like a type of material. It's like the material, the type about the operation type of and kind and composition of the solid waste also, and the inventory year, like for the landfill site, like landfill pit, we operate maybe last year or like 5 year later. 5 year ago, 10 year ago, something like that. We have to know about the information because the gas released in every year, right? We dispose this year, but the greenhouse gas may be occur in like a next month or next 3 months or next 5 months, something like that. We have to know about like the year of the operation and recovery of the methane in that year. We have to know about this and multiply by like the oxidation factor in year. This is they have like the more detail about information, but I just want to show you about how to calculation about the methane emission from the landfilling and why we focus only the methane, right? Because it's like the major gas of the landfill. This is also show the factor, unit, and method derived from like when we find information about the landfilling process. And during the greenhouse gas production, depend on the assumption of the equation about like which year and about the equation of degradation process, like exponential 1, exponential 2, and like other factor about the methane generation rate constant also. And the MFC is like a methane correction factor. It's very important. That's why normally we use the information from IPCC that they collect or various information from various countries and many regions, right? And they get some like at the average. And after that, The next process is the composting. If we choose the composting, maybe we have waste, total waste, maybe 100%, like assumptions, right? 100%, we transfer for like a landfilling, maybe 60%, and remaining 40%, maybe recycling 20, and make some composting 20. That's why we have to, for the waste management, not only one process for disposals, right? Maybe it's contain like a 2 or 3 process for our waste management, right? We have to include all process to calculate the greenhouse gas emission. This is show the composting, the greenhouse gas from the composting. We know the composting is like we collect some like the organic material and change to like the compost, right? Or the fertilizer. Maybe in our thinking, we assume like we can get the benefits, right? But during this process, we also produce amount of the greenhouse gas also. There are two major ways to decompose could emit the greenhouse gas by like a operation process. During the operation, we talked about the composting. If you remember about like the maybe before midterm exam, I'm talking about the composting, right? The composting that means an like aerobic conditions, right? To make the compost, we need like the oxygen or supply the air or oxygen into the compost piles, right? And during the operation, maybe we have to input like the air or like oxygen by using like electricity or diesel. It depends on the operations, right? And for the other greenhouse gas, it can release from like during the degradation process. After degradation, the methane and nitrous oxide is can release from like a compost piles, right? The emission factor for like the emission factor of the greenhouse gas emission from the composting. Normally, after degradation, the composting produce like 4 kilogram of methane per ton of organic waste, right? And 0.3 kilogram of nitrous oxide. We know methane and nitrous oxide is can cause of the global greenhouse gas, right? That is the greenhouse gas. But the nitrous oxide is produced lower than like a methane, only 0.3. But the global warming potential of the nitrous oxide is quite high. Uh, when compared to like the methane's about 21, right? But nitrous oxide may be 310 times uh, for of the global warming potential based on carbon dioxide equivalent. And also the produce, after we produce the compost if we use for like a agricultural purpose, it can replace like a conventional fertilizers, right? That means we use the compost for replace the chemical fertilizer. We can reduce the amount of like the supply essential nutrients. Uh, they have information about the nutrient rate of the compost. 7.1 kilogram of the nitrogen, phosphorus for like 4.1 of the phosphorus and 5.4 of the potassium. We know NPK is like the major nutrients of that plant needs, right? For their living, right? This is the if we use this compost, that means we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas by using the original fertilizer, like a chemical fertilizers, right? This is like we can for example, if during the process of the composting, we can produce methane and nitrous oxide from like the true process of operation and degradation. But if this compost we use for apply for fertilizer in agricultural area or agricultural sector, we can minus this number of the greenhouse gas, right? Like the substitution for the greenhouse gas emission. Maybe it can reduce 10% or 20% of greenhouse gas emission. And this is showed the composting, right? The greenhouse gas release during the composting from the operational, as I said, some we have to add some oxygen or need some like the pump for the pumping of the air to the compost pile, right? We need to use the fuels and also the energy types like we use like the energy in like the fossil fuels like diesels, right? The emission factor of the uh, this energy, these cells, we can multiply by emission factor like a 0.007 kilogram of the carbon dioxide equivalent per like the megajoules, right? This is from like operational process and emission from the during the degradation. During the degradation, that I said, the major gas is the methane and nitrous oxide, right? For the composting process. Don't confuse for the landfilling, the major gas is the methane and carbon dioxide, right? But for the composting, methane and nitrous oxide. For the methane, why I emphasize on the methane? Because the global warming potential is like at the uh, 21 times, right, of the carbon dioxide. And the global warming of nitrous oxide, that's I say 310 kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent, right? That's why two gas is very important for the composting in contribute to the greenhouse gas, right? We can calculate like the E, that means emission during the organic we calculate based on the amount of the uh, amount of like the solid waste, right? That we make the compost. And finally, after the total emission, that means like the emission from the operation and plus y plus degradation process, right? We can get the total gas emission, but as I said, this process we get the compost, right? And after we get the compost, if we use for like agriculture, we can make some like this number to minus from like the total greenhouse gas emissions, right? The PC is like the percent of the compost used for agricultural and gardening purpose. For example, if we produce like the 1 ton of the compost and we use 500 ton of the compost for garden, something like that. That means we use this compost 50%, right? We have to know about this number to put in like during the calculation process, and then we can get like avoid greenhouse gas from composting due to the avoid of the uh, chemical fertilizer production. That means reduce the amount of the greenhouse gas based on the original fertilizer that we use by replaced by like the compost, right? And also for the other process like anaerobic digestion or like a make some biogas, right? During the process of the biogas production, we consume like a lot of the energy also. It can produce like a greenhouse gas during the two steps, like the operation like use electricity and fuels, right? And the greenhouse gas emission from like a leakage. We know the anaerobic digestion is different from the compost. Compost we need degradable the organic waste by using oxygen, right? But for the anaerobic, that means lack of the oxygen. But sometimes under lack of the oxygen, sometimes we have some leakage during the process of reactor. If they have some leakage, maybe it's released directly to the environment like a methane gas, right? The methane gas of uh, diorganic waste, we have some information emission factor about 2 kilogram released from like a greenhouse gas per the organic waste, right? The produce of biogas is similar to like the compost. If we use the compost for like a fertilizer, we can minus the greenhouse gas, like a reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, right? This is biogas also. If we use this biogas for like electricity generation or like energy production, something like that, like a thermal energy, we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas by this process also. It calculates based on like the reduce of the energy use depend on we design like a use in like on site or design use for the out other side, something like that. And also for the calculate about the emission of the greenhouse gas emission under anaerobic digestion. That means during the operations, right? And also during the treatment process. That means during the degradable process. That process, right? It can produce a lot of the greenhouse gas also. The total gas emission is similar to the compost, right? Like a dwelling emission from during the operation from the bed based on the energy and electricity used, and also plus by like a emission treatment during the degradation process, right? Maybe some leakage, something like that. It can cause of the greenhouse gas release also. And if we use this for like the other objects, like use for like energy or use for like the thermal energy, something like that, or produce electricity based on the biogas production, we can find like the calculation about the avoidance of the greenhouse gas electricity. This equation based on we use for the electricity, right? And for this, we use based on biogas based on like a thermal, right? You can see this number. If finally, if we use this for other benefits like a thermal energy or and like electricity, we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas from the total greenhouse gas emission also. And for the others process, like the MBT, right? The MBT that's access like the pre-treatment process. Sometimes we have some before we make the composting, maybe we have to like separate some kind of the contaminants and also remove some like a moisture content and also cutting remove like the cut the size, like the reduce the size of the material to prepare the compost, something like that. This is like the MBT process. During this process, also produce the greenhouse gas by during the operation and during the degradation process. Also, is quite similar to like the greenhouse gas emission from like a composting calculations, right? And also similar to the anaerobic digestion also we calculate based on during the operation and treatment process. And other option we talked about like the disposal process, right? But during the disposal process, we have some other process like a recycling process. Recycling is can contribute to during the processing for the recycling material. It's also we consume a lot of the energy, right? For the like separate some kind of the waste for the recycling. It can cause of the greenhouse gas emission also because during pre-process we use a lot of the energy for the pre-processing and also for transfer for transportation for the recycling site, something like that. During this step or this process, it can cause of the greenhouse gas also. But the material recovery from the recycling is can replace to like a virgin production of equivalent like the substitute is similar to we use the biogas, we use the for the energy or for electricity generation, something like that. This is also during the process of recycling, we produce the greenhouse gas, but this recycling material we can reduce the or the virgin production. Like if we recycling about the plastic waste, that means we can reduce the original material to make the plastics, right? And this is also it can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas based on the recycling process. And during the emission for recycling, as I said, sometimes it's made from like the transportation and using like the electricity or fossil fuels. We can calculate the emission based on the recycling process also. But after we use the after we know about of the recycling process, we will know about the percent of its can recycling abilities, right? Maybe we separate assume in like the 100% of the recycling, but it can recycle ability only 80%, something like that. We have to calculate based on that number also because that number maybe we collect like the plastic 1,000 ton, something like that, 1,000 ton, but it can use only 800 ton. That means we have to calculate based on that number to convert to how we can reduce the amount of the virgin resource of that material. And this is show like the recycling emission, greenhouse gas emission, and avoidance from recycling based on the country. This is the example in Thailand, right? The type of recyclable like paper, plastic, aluminum, steel, and glass. You can see this is the net greenhouse gas. That means we can greenhouse gas emission from the recycling process and avoid greenhouse gas. We can minus by these numbers, right? And avoid greenhouse gas emission from landfilling. That means if we can recycling some part, that means we can reduce the amount of the final disposal process by landfilling step. We have to include this number also. You can see the net greenhouse gas calculated based on like a D equal to A minus B minus C. That means if we can recycling process, you can see we can get the number of the like a minus, right? That means we can get the benefits, right? If we recycling the paper. But for this number, like a plastic, you can see it's not the minus. That means during the recycling process, maybe we have to normally it's produced like a 2000 this number like a A, right? But the net emission for the plastic recycling maybe it can reduce amount of the of the greenhouse gas emission 249. Maybe it can just reduce, right? It's not to get more the benefits. That's why we have to think about this number also. And for the incineration process is also important for the waste management in like the final disposal process. Also, it can calculate during the emission, during the operation, like during the burning process. Normally, we have to input the energies, right, for the make some burning, for make the combustion by using the fossil fuels, right? During we use the fossil fuels, we have to calculate based on the carbon dioxide emission during the burning also. That's why we have to calculate during the operation. And after operation, we can get like the energy from incinerations, right? And it can during the burning process, it can produce like a combustion emission. It's like during the after burning, we can get the gas, right? Not based on like the operation, but this based on the burnings, right? Based on the burning, also we can calculate like the combustion emission, the total greenhouse gas. That means we have to include the operation from this, right? The operation of emissions, right? And also the combustion emission. We have to know about like the two process of the greenhouse gas emission. And also nowadays, we know we can use the energy from like the capture the energy from incineration process to produce the electricity like a waste to energies, right? If we can make some this calculate in this number, we can for that number, we can calculate about like the similar to we use the biogas and use the energy from like an anaerobic digestion also, right? Like make some compost, something like that. But this I don't show more information about the calculation because it's like more details about the calculation about the substitution use the energy based on incineration process, right? And the estimation of the greenhouse gas based on open burning is similar to incineration. Incineration, they have like a during the process, right? The operation and like during the combustion. But for the open burning, we don't control anything, right? We just burning and then release into the environment. That means only calculation only during the combustion emission. You can see this is maybe it can produce a lot of the greenhouse gas also, right? Based on this information about the open burning. And for today, I have the assignment, but before I assign your assignment, maybe I have to show you about how to calculation first. Just a second, I have to share the next file. Okay. Could you see the Excel file? Could you see it?
เห็นครับอาจารย์
Okay. Okay, I will give you the assignment, and also I will give you this file also to make the calculation about the estimation about the greenhouse gas emission. I will give you information to input, and also I want you to try to input that information in this file, and then make some capture the final, like the summary of the greenhouse gas emission from each process, right? Why I have to assign you more assignments, because I already just made about the design for no final exam. I will give you the score from like the assignment, and also you can go to this. I will show you like a figure. The greenhouse gas simulation. This is they have some like the information and emission factor to calculate about the greenhouse gas. Okay, I will show you the first sheet. They will talk about like the guideline to simulate about the greenhouse gas emission from the solid waste management, from like the transportation, and also the transportation and the process for disposal, like landfilling, composting, and redigestion, MBT, or recycling process, something like that. But depend on the information that I give you, right? You can see that information and just put the number to make the calculation. And then for the next sheet, that talks about like you have to choose like the please select the countries, right? Because why? That's I said in different region and different country they have some own like the emission factors, right? And this you can select like a Thailand, right? Thailand, and then for this column, you have to check your the climate zone. The climate maybe they have some like the impact on the degradable process, right? Like Thailand, moist and wet topicals, right? You can choose this. And then this is like the summary page, right? You don't input more information. You can see this table, it don't show anything. But if you go to the next sheet, right, next page, they talks about like you have to input information about like weight transportation, how many tons per month. I will give you information. For example, if you input like 10,000 tons per month, and type of the energy that you use for the transportation, like a diesel or like a natural gas, maybe information I give you, maybe diesels, like this is just the assumed numbers, right? And this is like a like a 1,000 lit per month, something like that. You can see like the blue color, the direct greenhouse gas emission from transportation, approximately 0.2 kilogram. This is like the like a equivalent, right? And then you can calculate the total emission from the transportation per month from these numbers, right? And then if you back to like the sheet that home, you can see this number, greenhouse gas emission from whole system, right? You show like this. And then I will give you information about like the waste composition. You have to add more the number like this, like a total waste that transfer to landfill. Look at this. If I give you information about landfilling, you have to choose the sheet for landfilling. If without the information about landfilling, okay, just go to the composting. I don't give you all process, right? But just one or two method for the disposal process, right? And then you can get the final information about the total greenhouse gas emission from solid waste management, like a total amount waste, mixed waste, go to landfill. The waste we collect like 10,000 tons per month, maybe go to landfill only 5,000 tons, something like this, and use the energy by this number and select the type of landfill. I already gave you information about type of landfill. This is like unmanaged. Unmanaged, that means just the sanitary landfill, but not good for not like the correct method. Just the open dump, but sometimes it's covered, but sometimes it's not covered by soil, something like that. And then you can put information like this. Don't forget, look at this, please adjust the total to 100%. That means information I will give you maybe already 100%. Okay, like this. And then you can calculate like the number of the direct greenhouse gas emission from mixed waste landfilling and open burning, something like that. And then back to home, you can get this number for landfilling. Like this, you can get this number. And then they have some that are calculate in the total number of greenhouse gas emission. And then make some, if you put all information, capture this figure of this page about the total gas emission, and then submit or turn in the assignment through the Microsoft Teams, right? I will set up the assignment in Microsoft Teams again. Okay, are you understand about the assignment? I have some like a recycling process. If I give you about the recycling process, you just put the number in this, like this. Okay. Do you have any question about the calculation of the greenhouse gas? I want to check
ไม่มี
your
ครับอาจารย์
I want to check your like you can touch in my like my lecture or not based on this assignments also. That I can give you the score based on your assignment. And okay, if you don't have information, if you don't have the question, and okay, back to second. Okay. This. This is the assignment 6, right? It's like the estimation of the greenhouse gas emission from the solid waste management. Capture the summary page, as I said, it's like a whole of the calculation and turn in Microsoft Teams before next Monday. Okay, this is I give you like a 10 point for this assignment. Okay. If you have any question or if you have question later, you can ask me later for like for your question. And also for today, okay, just a second, I have to stop the recording and